Thank you very much, Nicolo. And since I got this book and even the signature, I don't stop to carrying it and to draw knowledge from this very important side of the last year and a half, couple of years of the American presidency.
Identity question about this president, about who he is, what he represents, how people react to him as well. And that's playing out right now, where people, I've just come back from the West Coast on the latest piece of my book tour, and progressives, there are a lot of them in California, are saying, well, is this the guy we voted for, and has he changed? Which I wanted to get into with this book, but I kind of reversed the question for those people about themselves. Does it mean to be a Democrat now? What is the priority for them? And part of that relates to war. A lot of them thought that they heard him campaigning against the war. It was very easy to identify themselves as Democrats by being anti-war and anti-Bush. And those definitions are not so easy now. There's no Bush. He pulled out combat troops from Iraq. People confuse Iraq and Afghanistan. But it does throw up lots of really fascinating questions, and obviously the tax deal is one of those right now, where people are trying to figure out, is he on the left, is he in the center, where is he? Now, this is someone who suggested he could unite red and blue America. I point out to people on the left, that means you cannot just deal with blue America if you're going to do that. Actually, I also relate it back to, when he was in the Illinois State Senate, he dealt with, one of the things he dealt with was the death penalty, and introduced some reforms on the death penalty. And he worked with a number of conservative Republicans to get this deal through. He worked with He worked with a number of Republicans to get this through, and one of them was a state attorney by the name of Ed Petka. And Ed Petka loved the death penalty so much they called him Electric Ed. And in the end, Electric Ed worked with him and voted for these death penalty reforms. So for people who, on the left, who say this guy is sold out, they need to look at what he's done in the past. The King passage that you're referring to, I found really fascinating, because there's so few times when this president cracks in public. And that Martin Luther King Day speech, it was the Sunday just before, was one of those times when he said, this is tough for me. It's tough for me, you know, in addition to the sort of war and peace issues, it's tough because basically everyone's beaten up on him, and they just lost in Massachusetts, and people said, where is all the hope gone? Which is kind of where we are.
One of the things that Richard does so well in his book is point out, I think just if you look at one of the things about President Obama is one of the interesting things I find is that he has basically done or tried to do everything that he said that he was going to do or try to do. It just in so many cases haven't, you know, quite worked out. But if you look at what he said he was going to do during the campaign and what he set out to try to do, when you see the left now saying that they feel that they've been sold out, it's a little bit disingenuous, I think, because he did try, he didn't succeed on Guantanamo, because I think once you become president, you confront a lot of the realities of what the office is like, and it's a lot easier to like make promises from the campaign trail, and then you get behind the Oval Office, you get into the Oval Office and you sit behind that desk and you're hearing the presidential daily brief every day, and you're reading the intel assessments, and you're getting briefed, and it's not as easy. It's not, the world isn't as black and white as it looks when you're on the campaign trail. But
it's more gray.
It's a lot more gray, and I think we're going to see him moving even more. Particularly, we're at such an interesting time right now in this country and politically, and watching the evolution of Obama, the president. And I think now, as we're moving into the next 2 years, where you see him dealing with a Republican Congress, dealing with a Republican House, and looking for places where he can both compromise, but also perhaps in some places use his presidential authority to push through things that the Republicans may not necessarily like. But I was talking to some people at the White House over the past few days, and it's really interesting when you look at how the past week has gone with what has enraged the left so much. For instance, his compromise over the Bush tax cuts. At the White House, people seem to think that he's in a really sweet spot because he's angered his base, yeah, but the reality is they don't really have anywhere to go. And he stood up to his base. He compromised with the Republicans, and at the same time that you have people saying he shouldn't have compromised, he can stand up and say to the Democratic base, you guys need to grow up. You know, being president is about being president for all Americans, and this is how you govern, and you can't, you know, have these people hold us hostage. And so he ends up looking as if he's standing up to his base, and at a time, not to put everything in all political terms, but at a time where he needs to be moving to the center for the 2012 election cycle, he's exactly where he wants to be. And I think in the next 2 years, he's going to be looking for opportunities like this one where he can look presidential and where he can actually look as if he's rising to the, you know, above the politics in Washington, above the fray. And that, you know, that can come from a lot of the strains that Richard talks about in his book, I think, kind of flick it left.
Complain about President Obama, because from my perspective, he has been incredibly aggressive in pushing through what I view as the most left-leaning agenda that we've seen from a president since, you know, the 1960s, maybe since the 1930s. And whatever you think of the outcome, or whatever you think of the policies themselves, he's been extraordinarily successful in doing this. Now, you know, as a conservative, he didn't spend a lot of time, in my view, reaching out to Republicans, reaching out to conservatives. He basically said, I was elected president, I'm going to push my agenda through, and this is how I'm going to do it. So he outsourced, for instance, the first stimulus package, or the real stimulus package, in the first days of the administration to Democrats on Capitol Hill and said, put this together. And he did it without much consultation with Republicans, something he later said that he regretted. But you know, this is a guy, I think, who has spent the better part of 2 years pushing what is a fairly aggressive, you know, in American political terms, liberal agenda, and doing it very successfully. Now, I think you saw to a certain extent that the country, which I still view America as a center-right country, didn't like it, or at least large segments of the country didn't like it. We saw that in the elections. And so I am looking at President Obama now in two separate ways, the pre-election Barack Obama and the post-election Barack Obama. And now I've been very skeptical, because all of the speculation in Washington right now is he going to come to the center, or how far is he going to come to the center? I've been actually skeptical that he's going to do it much. The idea is that he needs to move to the center to be reelected in 2012, to appeal to the independents that he's lost. I didn't think he would do it much, largely because I think he's a man of tremendous conviction. He believes what he believes. He has a philosophy, a way of seeing the world. And while he has a pragmatic streak that Richard has teased out both in the first book and the most recent one, he's also, you know, a man who's committed to his world philosophy and wants to push it. I will say I've been a little surprised in the post-election Obama, this tax deal. I think he gave more than I would have expected him to, and I think what a lot of people are trying to figure out is this a sign of things to come? Is he going to be actively looking for things, for places, for policy ideas where he can reach out to Republicans and actually come together and do things, get things done? Or, and this is what I suspect is more likely to happen, will this be all positioning for 2012, where he's trying to find issues that make him appeal to the center in much the same way that Republicans
That's the Clinton model. And there was Bill Clinton in the White House the other day. Elvis was back, and he was back in the building, and it looked like a time warp. And so that many people took as a signal that Obama was going to triangulate, the word that terrifies Democrats. Will there be another phase? I agree with Steve that President Obama has done something which is unusual in the United States. The last 2 years, we had something very alien to American tradition. We had party government. Most parliamentary democracies understand party government. They expect it. When I was in Europe, after Obama was elected, I kept getting asked the same question. The president is a Democrat. The Democrats have a big majority in the House and Senate. Why don't they just govern? And they did. That's what Steve was talking about. They did. They governed. they did exactly what an elected Labour Party or Conservative Party in Britain would do. They passed their program. But this is so alien to the American experience that it was considered horrifying to a lot of people, because that's not the way our country is usually governed. We don't believe in party government, we don't like it, and we find it difficult to accept. Virtually every major piece of legislation in American history, including Social Security, Medicare, the Reagan tax cuts, the Bush tax cuts, the Patriot Act, everything is bipartisan. It has to be in order to survive. Most of Obama's signal achievements were not bipartisan. And the result is they are politically vulnerable, as the health care bill is, because this is a very, very different experience. And it was a very, in your way, European experience, which is why people are constantly saying he must be a socialist, because we had a very un-American experience in the last 2 years. This has to change, obviously. The Democrats don't have a majority in the White House. But one fears that what we're going to end up with is, as we started to, at the beginning of the second 2 years of Clinton, gridlock. That is what we have. That's what we had in 1995. It ended, of course, with the shutdown of the government. That could happen again. The Tea Party people say, if we shut down the federal government, it will stay shut down. This angers Americans to no end. When they vote for a divided government, which is what they have done, Democratic President, Republican House of Representatives, they vote for compromise. What they get is gridlock. I've often been jealous of the British Constitution. In the British Constitution, gridlock is unconstitutional. It can't happen because there is a constitutional principle in Britain. His Majesty's government must be carried on. If His Majesty's government is not carried on, if you have gridlock in Britain, the government will collapse and they'll have another election. It is not constitutional. In this country, I'm afraid, it's become more or less the normal way of proceeding. Clinton broke through that only after a showdown at the end of the first year of the Republican Congress. We'll wait to see, I guess we will see, whether this happens also to President Obama. Democrats in Congress, he more or less, as Steve said, he more or less turned over the passage of most of the legislation to the Democrats in Congress. Look, I like to put it this way. I mean, the immediate problem is jobs. But the longer term problem is that, well, I like to say that in the 1960s, the Chinese had a great proletarian cultural revolution. They got over it. In the 1960s, the United States had a great American cultural revolution. We're still fighting it. It's been going on for almost 50 years. We can't get over it. It's as old as the Chinese proletarian cultural revolution, which seems like medieval history. But here in the United States, the divisions are still alive. It was Clinton and Bush. Those divisions are very deep. We've had 4 presidents in a row who got elected on a promise to bring the country together, which is what the voters want. The first President Bush said that he would be a kinder and gentler president after Reagan. He lasted 1 term. President Clinton got elected as a New Democrat and the third way. And the country ended up bitterly divided. The second President Bush promised the day he declared himself a candidate in Austin, Texas in November 1999, I was there, he said, I'm going to be a uniter, not a divider. That didn't happen. And now President Obama was elected after he gave his great speech at the 2004 Democratic Convention. There is no red America, there is no blue America, there's only the United States of America. And somehow the country has ended up even more divided. I mean, you've had 4 presidents in a row. All of them have tried to grapple with this problem, and none of them has succeeded. It's a great tragedy.